Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the workshop. Today we're going to make a mallet. In fact, we're going to make two oak end grain mallets. We're going to make one normal usable size, and then in true bowler fashion we're going to make an enormous comedy size oak end grain mallet. Before we get going making some sawdust, let's just take a look at one or two of the mallets that I've had and still use. So this was the first mallet that I had. This was turned on a lathe by a good friend of mine. Forget the species it's made of, but it's pretty well used up. That's why it's covered in tape, just to hold it together. These next two, they're made out of a single piece of oak. These aren't end grain mallets, they're side grain mallets. They're kind of rough and ready, quick and dirty, served a purpose, but again, like the first one, pretty well used up. The inspiration for today's project has come from this one. This was made in a couple of hours, several months ago, rough and ready, but it turned out much, much nicer than I expected it to do. This is an end grain mallet, but the problem with it is it's fractionally too big to be used daily, but it's a bit too small to be termed comedy size, which is why I want to make two more. Should we introduce what we're going to make them out of now? We're only going to be using scrap material, offcuts that we've had lying around the workshop for quite a while, stuff that wasn't used on previous projects. So the handle for the small mallet is going to be made out of this. This is a ripping of kiln-dried, 2-inch thick oak. We're going to cut that down. That will become the handle. The head is going to come out of this. I'm going to have to reduce that down in dimension a bit. I think that's an offcut from a porch that we made quite a long time ago. But the big one, the comedy size one, the handle for that is coming out of this. That is 6-inch by 3-inch oak. We're going to reduce it down a bit, but comedy size is definitely the flavour. And the head, hang on, is coming out of that. That is an 8x8 lump of fresh sawn oak. It's been down on the firewood heap. It's been seasoning for a little while. I'm not too concerned about it. But it's going to be big, and it's going to be, as I've said before, comedy size. We're going to use this existing mallet to take some scales from because I very much like the way it looks. I like the proportions. It just looks right, but it's a bit big. So for the usable size mallet, we're going to reduce this down from an existing 90mm to somewhere in the region of about 80mm. So that is going to be 80, and then width-wise, it's currently at 175. We're going to reduce that down to 150mm, somewhere in that region. The comedy size one, I'm just going to double everything. I'm going to make it twice as big, full comedy size. So, thickness, 90, 180. Width, 350mm. Handles are the same. Current one is in the region of 36mm, so double that is 72mm square. And lengthwise, overall length, this one is currently 450. I'm going to reduce that down a little bit for the smaller one, but not much. We'll make it 400. But we're going to keep the theme of doubling everything up for the big one. 900mm long. Let's get some power tools fired up. So I've just cross-cut that down to slightly oversized for the time being in terms of width. I'm going to rip it down on the bandsaw to make it a bit thinner. And then the other dimension that we didn't talk about is how deep it's going to be. That's going to be about 100mm. All that happens on the bandsaw. Now we get to move on to the comedy size one. That's not going to work on the crosscut saw, so we need a different machine. Back to the bench. Just wait there. That ought to do it. Now, I only want to cut this once. The small head, we've left that with square ends, but a quick Google search has told me that 5 degrees is the optimum angle for a mallet head. So I'm going to cut that 5-degree angle onto this now, in the interests of only cutting it once. Five-degree angle, squared all the way around. This saw has a 350mm blade in it, so it's still going to take 2 passes to cut it, but only 2 passes, 1 from each side. And it's not as ferocious as it looks. It's actually quite tame. You've just got to be in charge of it and hold on tight. Now I need to make it thinner. Back to the bandsaw. Little recap on what we've done so far. Both heads for the new mallets are now done. They are down to final dimension, 5-degree cuts on. What I also chose to do is run them over the top of the planer thicknesser to make sure they're flat and square, and underneath the planer thicknesser to make sure they're all nice and parallel. I did that just because I've got access to that machine. That could be done by hand if you chose, or you could just accept that these things aren't perfectly square, and in this instance that wouldn't much matter. The next thing we're going to turn our attention to is the handle. So we've got a bit more cross-cutting to do and a bit more material reduction on the thicknesser. Right, handles. We have cross-cut the material we're going to use for the handles to length, not surprisingly, on the cross-cut saw. In terms of dimension, we're going to revert back to this one, the original one. We're using that as scale. This handle is 40mm square. I know it's round, but the end is square, and the ends of the new handles are also going to remain square. So 40mm square. For the smaller mallet, I'm going to reduce that down to 37. The big one, we're going to keep the doubling up theme true. We're going to make it a straight 80mm square, which granted is very big, but it has to look proportionate. So we've got a bit of bandsawing to do, and we've got a bit of thicknessing to do. Handles straightened, squared, planed down to final dimension. So now it's time to turn our attention to the mortise that has to go through the heads to allow the handle to go in. So bit of careful layout, bit of careful setting out, and then we can look at the hollow chisel mortiser, which is what we're going to use to dig the mortise in this small head. The big one is going to need a slightly different machine. So I'm just finding the center point of this small head with our sliding square, which I have done, so we can put a center line down. And then we can measure half the thickness of our handle either side of that center point, so then the handle is in the middle. Half of 37 is 18.5. Reset the sliding square. Perfect. So repeat the process in the other direction and repeat both of those processes on the big one. Mortise is through the head of the small mallet. I did clean it up with a chisel. That little hollow chisel mortiser does go all the way through, but I just cleaned it up with a hand chisel and a mallet that I'd made previously. So you can see now what it's going to look like. I can see that there is a small gap all the way around where the handle goes through the mortise in the head. That's fine. We're going to be wedging this handle into the head. More about that later. Now what we've got to do is the same set of processes to the comedy size mallet, and for that we need another tool. Hang on. and that is this one. This is a chain mortiser. This is the machine that we use to dig the mortisers in the oak frame projects that we're involved in on a daily basis. The hollow chisel mortiser wouldn't even touch that. It just wouldn't fit on the machine. So that's a non-starter for the head of the big mallet. The chain mortiser is going to get some action now. So you've seen how much of a mess the chain mortiser makes, but it does one unbelievably good job. That mortise has gone all the way through. We've fine-tuned it with a chisel, just like we did on the small one. And as you can see, it's pretty big. So the next job on both of these is to shape the handle. We don't want a square handle. We want a nice round handle. We're going to leave the bottom section square and the top section square, obviously, because it has to locate into its mortise. But that's what we're going to do next, shape the handle. The handle on the original is round. It was square, but we made it round, obviously, so that you can hold it. The square section on the bottom gives a bit of purchase, a bit of grip, and looks good too. The square section at the top kind of gives it that stop chamfer kind of detail that I like on our oak frame structures that we build daily. Now, perfection is to turn these handles on a lathe. I haven't got a lathe, so we're going to have to improvise. So the way we're going to start and turn these handles into round handles is just to remove some material. We're going to do that with a router. We've got a small router for the small handle and a big router for the big handle. I've put a 45-degree chamfer bit in there to knock the corners off, and then we've got another tool that we're going to use to improvise to remove more material to make them round. So, a bit of routing. So that's the corners knocked off. That is going some way towards being round now. You'll see how we finish that off in a minute. Big router, big handle. Let's get to it. So this process is something that I wouldn't advise that you did at home, but I've done it before and it does work. I've turned the belt sander upside down. I'm going to lock the trigger on. It's connected to a dust extractor, and I'm going to use that as kind of a belt grinder to finish off making the handle of this small one round. That process is very effective. That's removed a lot of material and it is now pretty round. We're going to finish it off with the orbital sander, get rid of the pencil marks, blend the chamfers in. But that's pretty much ready to go, apart from the wedge, but we'll come back to that. Now I've got to do the same to the big handle, which is going to be a bit more challenging. So let's have a go at that. That's the bulk of the material removed with the belt sander. Now I accept it isn't perfectly round, but this isn't a usable item anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and tidy that up with the orbital sander. This one is pretty round. I'm quite pleased with the way that that's turned out. Again, I'm going to tidy it with the orbital sander and then the next process. Well, that's those nice and round, or at least round enough. So the way that these are held in the heads is with a wedge, as seen on the original one. Now, these are all made out of oak, apart from the wedges, because I've got a piece of this, which is just about my favourite timber species out there. This is Wenge. So we're going to cut some wedges out of this, cut a slot in the top of each handle, put the handles in the heads and drive those home with a bit of glue in the mix as well, and that will hold everything together. But the first thing we have to do is cut some wedges out of this beautiful piece of Wenge. So back to the bandsaw. This is why Wenge is my favourite timber out there, because when you cut into it, it exposes the grain, and the grain is just spectacular. Look at that, look. Wedges are cut, so I'm just setting out now to drill a hole through the handle so that as we drive the wedges into the slot, it doesn't split. The hole will stop it splitting. So we're going to drill a 4mm hole. That feels about right in this instance, right in the middle, below where the wedges are going to get to. bit of chamfer detailing before final assembly. It is cute, isn't it? Final assembly. I'm excited about this. I do like making things from nothing other than scrap using simple processes. Function over form. It's not a piece of furniture, it's a tool. Anyway, handle, head, wedges, glue. Trusty hammer. So you can see how that wedge has tightened that joint up. That is never coming off. So we're going to split this last wedge down now and put one piece in there and one piece in there. So wedges are in. I've trimmed them back, given them a final hammer home, and you can see how tight that joint is. Granted, there is a little tiny gap down there, but that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. This is function over form. So I'm going to sand those flush, then we can assemble the big one. Here we go then, comedy size mallet assembly. Bit of glue. You can hear it tightening up. Pretty good. I'm smiling because they're done. And just like the original one, they've turned out nicer than I expected them to. They're not perfect. That's not the idea. Like I said earlier, this is not furniture making. These are tools. One is usable, one is clearly not. The last thing that I'm going to do, is give them a coat of Danish oil just to make the grain pop and to give it a bit of protection, particularly the small one, because the small one will be coming out on site with us and it will be getting used. So I'm going to put my gloves on. Now's probably a good time to ask you to like the video, leave a nice comment and subscribe to the channel. That helps me out tremendously. Let's get some oil on. If anybody's got any ideas of other simple but comedy size scalable tools that you'd like to see us make, get in the comments, make a suggestion. If we can do it, we will, because I enjoy this kind of thing. This kind of project is right up my street. I've thoroughly enjoyed the few hours it's taken to make it. I know it's a bit of a laugh. It is unusable, but it's a very cool thing to own. So that is what I believe to be the world's biggest end grain oak mallet. Now, although I've used some pretty specialist and unusual looking machines to make these, there is nothing to stop you doing it with hand tools alone. Power tools make life easier, but hand tools are just fine. I've thoroughly enjoyed making these. I'm looking forward to using the one that's actually usable on site on a daily basis, and I'm delighted that I get to own that. Thank you very much for watching, folks. Bye for now.